Welcome to Project Synapse. We've been getting together to talk about what's happened in AI over the past weekend, what's about to happen in AI. My usual friends are here, Marcel, Gagne, John Pinard. We are the Project Synapse crew, along with people who join us through our Discord server and all of you out there. So welcome. We're going to just start talking about this. We'd already started but I had to do an intro because it's a conceit of starting the podcast. Because otherwise, all of you out there would just walk in the middle of the conversation and go, who are these crazy guys?
Well, so they might like that. It could be cool.
Yeah, I agree. They'll now get an intro, and now they can ask, who are these nutcases?
Can I do the Dr. Johnny Fever?
You can if you like. For those of you who aren't old enough, we've been discussing WKRP, which apparently Marcel Gagne paid attention to the plot. I paid attention to Bailey. If you know the series, you'll know what I'm talking about. So, back that I thought was under the surface. Let me explain this the way I saw it. I watched late last week an OpenAI, one of their many webcasts that they're doing. They seem to be doing one every couple days now, releasing something. And I was blown away because they had the model and it was connected by what looked like standardized APIs or connectors to a number of tool sets that could go and do various things. And that was at the heart of their agent outline, was that you could ask the model, it would go and get what looked like, I'd call it a standardized API, or a standardized set of tools, and it would reach out and do things. But this was neat because now you could plug the model in and get it to execute tasks, what everybody's calling agents. Essentially, you were getting beyond asking the model to do something, getting something neat, having it read something, have it prepare something, and actually getting into taking action. And that was the essence of this that really blew me away. We have this idea of agents, which are essentially ways of getting certain tasks done. If I have the model that's thinking there, now I want to book reservations. I want to check stock prices and come back to me. I want to organize a party. Whatever I want to do, I give the agent that task, think out the steps, figure out what you need to do, go execute them, whether that be go to a travel website. But the classic one everybody gives, because I think it's easiest to understand, is booking a vacation. I want to book a vacation. We've got me and my wife, or maybe you've got a family with some kids. I want you to go out and look for the right hotel within my budget. I want you to come back and tell me what my options are. Once I do that, I want you to go and book the flights and the hotels. Essentially, being able to do meaningful things
autonomously. The key is to get it to do these things autonomously to some degree. Even things like deep research, for instance. You could argue that the deep research mode that we've got in a lot of the large language models at the moment are in fact agents. Because what you do is you set them up with, this is the research project that I want you to go into. I want you to collect this information. I want you to visit a variety of websites. I want you to filter all of these different websites and the information that's there. And I want you to come back and give me a report and build a table and maybe generate an audio podcast that goes with it in the case of something like Notebook LM. And it's doing all of these things more or less autonomously. Now, every once in a while, obviously, you want it to check in with you, as in if it's booking a trip for you, you to verify the hotel that it picked and say, yes, you may actually go ahead and use my credit card, or put in your own credit card at that point. The thing that's interesting from an agent perspective is the models that people have gotten used to. You give it something really simple, write me a poem or make an image of this character doing that sort of thing, or a little video clip, but it becomes an agent when there's a complex set of instructions that it needs to follow in order to do whatever it is you want it to do. And agents are showing up in a lot of interesting ways. Like I said, a predefined set of instructions works, but you can also have agents that bring up a browser and go and point and click on web pages and things like that. Like OpenAI's Operator, for instance, is the big one. And of course, the one that I'm sure you saw in the news, people were talking about it as the next DeepSeek moment, was Manus out of China.
Sorry, that's one that I have meant to dive into this week. Tell me a little bit more about what's happening.
The hype on this one is amazing, actually. If you've seen the demos that OpenAI did of Operator, it visits the websites, it points and clicks, opens up a web page, points and clicks, and goes all over the place, and occasionally asks you questions on what to do. And of course, the resources that it requires are pretty intense, because effectively the way these work, at least right now, is it's taking snapshots every few microseconds or half seconds to know where the mouse is on the screen, to know what it's looking at, and then crunching all this massive amount of information to do these things. Now, what's interesting, you mentioned Claude. Anthropic did have what they called a computer mode, where it would take over your computer and do things. But what OpenAI did is they actually released it as a product. Granted alpha, okay, and granted you had to be on their $200 a month plan to be able to do this thing, but they released it to the general public to be able to use if you were willing to pay that $200 a month. What's interesting about Manus is Manus claims, I'm going to be very careful how I say this here, claims to be able to do this. People were calling it like the next DeepSeek moment. And a DeepSeek moment, for people who may not have been following this, is DeepSeek, a Chinese artificial intelligence company, released a model that was on par, apparently, with OpenAI's o1. It was a deep research model, a reasoning model, and it did it at a tiny fraction of the cost of what it cost OpenAI to do this thing. And of course, when people talk about the DeepSeek, everything is having a DeepSeek moment now. And most of those things are out of China.
Yeah, but the idea of this, let's take the DeepSeek moment out of it because everything can be labeled as that. The reality is that DeepSeek is now as a meme is something spectacular, usually that comes out of China. But this is pretty interesting.
Because it is interesting in what it promises. And what promises may not be what it looks like, which is particularly interesting. I know that this happened with DeepSeek as well. Did they really do all this stuff for so little money? Did they maybe steal from OpenAI and just distill the o1 model? There were all these questions happening. But with Manus, there are a couple of things that are interesting. One of them is that it's not available in China, which is interesting given that it's a Chinese product. Now, there's a potential reason for this, okay? Like I said, if you mirror Operator with deep research mode to get it to do all of these things, not just to do the deep research thing, but also to go and search around on the web and click things and so forth, it's reasonably impressive. I unfortunately am basing everything on videos because there's a wait list you have to join. I am on the wait list, and they are picking and choosing. One of the things that people are talking about is that it's extremely expensive to actually run. So like basically every query to Manus costs about $2, which is why they're handing out these little tiny accesses to people that they think are going to be valuable and are going to prop it up. That is one thing. The second is that it is said that under the surface, it's Claude 3.7 Sonnet that's actually doing all the smarts. And if you take a look at the API costs of Claude 3.7 Sonnet to be able to do these things, this is where you get to $2 per query to be able to do these high-level things. So whether this is another DeepSeek moment of really cheap things, we will have to wait and see, because the evidence seems to point to it's disruptive as hell in terms of what it promises, but the promises have yet to pan out. It's cool, but is it really as cool as it sounds?
So let's go back to what it promises. In there. What is it doing?
Think of it, okay, one of the best ways to look at it is that there are a lot of pre-built tools already out there on the internet. There are APIs that you can plug into to be able to search for things, to be able to make reservations. And some of them are tools for doing mathematics. Some of them are tools for doing coding. Some of them are tools for image crunching, image generation, all these sorts of things. And what Manus is doing is it's using an LLM to tie in to a whole bunch of other tools in the background to create, I hesitate to say it, but to create the illusion of a collective tool. And in fact, there was a project that came out like about a day afterwards, and they talked about this as being so world-changing. Within less than 24 hours, there was a project out on the internet on GitHub called Manus, which you can do a search for. It does basically all those things and shows what's really under the hood of this thing.
Okay, so how is that different from Model Control Protocol, the MCP that everybody's talking about? And I've been following that this week. Basically, it's a setup, and I think that the simplest explanation for it is you can use an API to communicate with outside systems. And I think one of the reasons why OpenAI and ChatGPT was so useful was because they actually had functions built into it. You could use it to call an API from an outside system and get some information, and you could get things done in that model. But the MCP, really one layer of abstraction over an application that says, I can talk to an AI model. They call it reflection, which says, I'll expose all my tools to you, and you have certain tools that you build into this. That's been the big thing in development this week, being the connector between these AI models and pretty standard systems. You now can say, I can put a tool set together that will allow me to talk to a SQL database, to be able to communicate with an existing application, and do that in a way that you don't have to write an API for everything in all its detail, because that system publishes, the system that you want to go to, publishing its own MCP layer in there. But how is Manus different?
Well, I was just going to say that MCP certainly opens up the opportunity for a lot of systems to be able to connect to things. People looking at, I want to put in AI in my environment, but I'm using a more antiquated system that doesn't have these great integrations. It's not a Salesforce or an SAP, but if they can use MCP to connect through a plain API, that opens up a lot of opportunities.
The biggest difference to keep in mind is that Manus is, I have a bunch of things out there and I just learn how to use them all independently. Whereas MCP, which I think stands for Model Context Protocol, I have to be careful
what did I say?
Because I keep
It is Model Context Protocol.
Yeah, Model Context Protocol, as opposed to Master Control Program, which is the AI system in the movie Tron, the 80s. MCP, the MCP, the Master Control Program. Cool, huh?
People are going to ask, did you guys just go to sleep for 30 years? Because all you remember is stuff from the 70s and 80s?
These are the formative years, dude. Okay, yeah, that's why the greatest, and to be clear, there's a video that you should just throw it in the comments here. It's a lot of fun that argues that time basically ended in 1999. What happened after 1999 is that the Earth was destroyed. We're living in a simulation at the moment, much like in the Matrix. And basically, we're being fed stuff rehashed from the 70s and 80s and 90s.
So that's how we got through Y2K. I knew we didn't update all that COBOL code.
Anyway, the reason that the Model Context Protocol is different is that it's actually a standard for connecting and interconnecting all of these various things. What Manus is doing as an agent, it's not doing that. It's figuring it out as it goes along. It connects to this thing, it connects to that thing, it figures it out. Again, remember, a lot of what's happening with Manus is clouded. We don't really see a lot of it. But it's taking things as they are. Whereas MCP, because it's a standardized protocol, there is a set of rules under which you build all of these connectors. Think of it as the USB-C standard or USB standard on your PC. Okay, with MCP, we've standardized on USB-C. We've said, screw all these other connectors. We're just going to do this one, and everything plugs into the same USB-C hub. Okay, because of that, it tends to be used primarily for external data sources, like databases. And in programming, a good way to think of it is in object-oriented programming. You've got these predefined objects that you plug into. In this case, it's a series of services, whether they be additional programs or database inputs, which is why MCP is so exciting in relation to coding with agents like Cursor and Windsurf as two of the big examples that are out there right now. Sorry, you look like you're about to say something, and I keep talking.
No, I'm listening. I understand how strange this might seem, but I'm just listening to you.
See, the world did end in 1999 because this would never have happened.
Because I'm trying to think of this kid, he was probably in his 30s, came up with, in the early days when we were coming up, and we had all of the devices people were trying to use. They had that little Star Trek thing that you could tap that was on your chest, and you could talk to OpenAI. And this one kid came up with, it was an orange device, and he used it. Rabbit, thank you. So we came up with Rabbit, and he put it out as it can book your vacation and all that sort of stuff. Turns out behind the scenes, it was a whole lot of JavaScript or some other programming.
And no attention to that man behind the curtain.
Yeah, Wizard of Oz type stuff. Now we're getting closer to reality on this, but this is the messiness of reality. I'm hearing about Manus. I'm wondering about it. The communication with other systems is still complex. John, you're going to love this from a security point of view, because when you've got these types of connections, there's a whole new thing called vibe coding, which is basically, I don't know how to code, but I can ask an AI to do that, and which always fell apart because, and I've tried it myself, you can write a whole pile of code, but you have to know how to connect it. You do have to actually understand things about how you connect it, how you fit it in, and all that sort of stuff. So now with the connectors that people are putting in, and they're not just MCP, they're building connectors to a lot of different things as well you can pick up from different services. I think Cursor is one of those, isn't that?
Cursor is complicated because there are two different products called Cursor. But you're probably, if you're thinking of it in terms of vibe coding, you're probably thinking of cursor.com, which is effectively an IDE built on top of VS Code. Okay, not Visual Studio, not Microsoft's Visual Studio, but VS Code, the open source coding and development.
What is it with everybody naming the same thing over and over again? This is getting
So
harder.
you have to start reusing.
Well,
Because I read that same thing and I read VS Code and I went, what? Visual Studio Code's coming back?
VS Code is probably more popular than Visual Studio. It is used by people in the open source community. Because it is an open source tool, a lot of things can be built on top of it. Cursor.com is built on top of that, and it has hooks for MCP, for the model control protocol. It has those hooks there. I don't think it's activated by default. I've been working with Windsurf, I've been working with Cursor, and I've also been doing vibe coding, just straight LLMs. So I can go into that a little bit if you want as well. But both Cursor.com and Windsurf are the biggies out there. They're the big names at the moment. Cursor.com is probably a little on the geekier side. If you're dealing with a tool like Cursor or a tool like Windsurf, you probably want to know how to code, or at the very least how to navigate tools like this, because it shows you the code and it references it and it says, do you agree to these changes and all that sort of thing. So it is an interactive coding session. It's the sort of thing that a coding professional would use versus just some schmuck like me who wants to sit down and write a quick Space Invaders clone, in which case I would fire up DeepSeek, or I would fire up Claude or OpenAI to do that sort of thing. All of them have their various strengths. MCP is just a hook into those things, and they all have their versions of how you talk to the large language model under the surface. Both Whisper and Cursor by default, although you can plug in your API key and use different models, use Claude because Claude is the darling of coders.
So if I was sitting out listening to this program right now and driving along in my car, and I'd be going, what the heck is happening? I mean, this is the point. We took something this week, and I think we started to really get into the complexities of these systems. We've had a number of simplistic connectors existing in AI, and now we're getting down to a complexity level if we're really going to use AI as the driver behind systems to be able to accomplish a full task, to take it from end to end. You're going to love this, John, when you see what these things can do behind the scenes, because I'm betting nobody thought much about security on this.
Absolutely not. One of the things people are starting to think about is, for the longest time, everybody's been talking about these tools, OpenAI and Claude and all these others, how cool they are and all these neat things you can do with it. But then they start looking at, how do I integrate that into my existing ERP system or my manufacturing system? And they're going, I don't know. It's great if you've got a newer system like SAP or Salesforce, but a lot of people are running older systems and need to figure out how to tie them in, not just once, but to be able to maintain it on an ongoing basis too. You don't want to have full-time programmers that do nothing but tweak the AI so that it will continue to work with your tools. So when you were talking about MCP, and if they're building these protocols or standardizing some of these protocols, it will certainly make that easier. It's like they've taken, we've come out with these really cool tools, don't know how to use them yet, or don't know how we're going to incorporate them into business, but now they're saying, here's some ways that we can start to incorporate them into business. I belong to a global consortium of companies that are looking at AI.
You're the guys who meet in Europe and talk about
the cabal.
Yeah.
Yes. But one of the things that I've found, we're a smaller credit union in Canada, and it's amazing because everybody's got the same questions and the same problems about either we sink a whole ton of money to custom integrate AI into our systems, or how do we tie this in, right? So there's an awful lot of companies worldwide, and Jim, you had one of your podcasts the other day talked about the adoption rate, the adoption cost and things of, and talking to CEOs of them not knowing exactly whether or not they're getting anything out of the $1 million that they've sunk into AI and that type of thing. I think there's a long way to go, but they're starting to set some of these tools out to tie things into older systems.
There are a lot of companies sitting on piles of money. If they're going to go forward into the future, if they just want to cash out and fire everybody and say, I'm just going to live out my best life for the rest of my days, hey, fantastic. But otherwise, if you're sitting on this pile of money, okay, you got to spend it to go to the next level. The idea that there's no immediate return seems short-term thinking we've managed to get ourselves into over the years.
So the guy who called me a communist on YouTube, this is the real communist.
No, but seriously, it wasn't the whole idea that you're supposed to spend money to make money? Wasn't that part of the...
No, that was never an idea, Marcel. That makes you the idealist of all times. I used to work for a guy who headed one of Canada's financial institutions, and somebody said, you got to spend money to make money. And he looked at us all and goes, you don't have to spend money. You're supposed to make money.
Everybody's looking at what the ROI is. What's my
okay,
ROI?
okay.
If I'm going to drop $1 million on AI, how long is it going to take me to get that $1 million back?
At some point, if you're trying to get to the next step, and I'm not saying I can articulate what the next step is for one company versus another. If you're going to get to the next step, you have to be willing to take some kind of a risk. And that risk typically is a financial risk.
Absolutely.
This morning on the news, there was a news item in my feed saying that Apple is losing $1 billion a year on Apple TV Plus. Are they really losing $1 billion a year? If you're losing $1 billion, shouldn't you just shut down the whole operation?
Exactly.
Somehow, they keep pouring money into it and making really cool shows like Severance. You guys are watching Severance, right?
No.
I have not been watching it, but I've heard about it. It's on my
man,
list.
dudes, I've lost all respect for you.
Not that you had any to start with.
Yeah, I read books. I don't watch
I
much.
listen to audio.
Eventually, I'll take a look at something. I spend enough
Sorry,
time
I don't know.
in front of this.
I apologize for that diversion, whatever it happens.
That's
to be.
okay. We were duly chastised.
Okay,
We're supposed to be accumulating new memes
I
by
think-
watching this Severance show. I get it.
Marcel, going back to your point about you've got to spend money to make money, I agree. I think, to me, that's one of the things that sets businesses apart is short-term thinking versus long-term thinking. That if people are planning ahead for how do we take things to the next step, then you're right. They're going to spend money now, knowing that they're not going to get anything out of it right away, but longer term they will. And there's other companies that are looking at it going, if I'm going to spend $100,000 on something now, I need to make sure I'm getting that back now.
There are two models of companies. There are the 5 big tech companies that can afford to do stupid things or billions of dollars onto bad ideas and still survive because one shareholder controls the company, or in the case of Elon Musk, who's only got 13% of his stock in Tesla, it's a cult. They won't question the dear leader. So he can do all kinds of crazy things. Same thing with Apple, but Apple's a little bit of a different story. And I think to some extent, Facebook is, they're just making so much money, and maybe Google is as well. They're making so much money now that $1 billion here, $1 billion there is lunch money. With the thing that you put forward for Apple, that's a $35 billion division. This little streaming thing is in there. It very well account for $1 billion more expenses than it brings in revenue, but washed into that division, nobody's even going to notice it. You have these huge companies. Google gets a little closer to the market at times. They tend to be seen as a business more than Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg went into this whole thing of we're going to have virtual worlds and all of that sort of stuff. I don't know how many billions he blew on that. Elon Musk can't alienate customers faster in Tesla. If you actually went to business school and studied how to alienate customers, you couldn't do a better job than Elon's doing. And yet still CEO.
What's amazing is he's alienating the customer base that actually buys electric cars.
Those companies exist in a realm of fiction that none of us who run other types of companies, me running my small development company or my publishing business, not take the hobbyists out of it like me who have the tiny things. There are people who run companies that have 5, 10, 25, 100 million, even $1 billion a year. They watch expenses because you can get caught very easily. You can't dump $10 million on something and then say, oops. It's just not going to work. Now, we can sit back and criticize these people for this. And in some cases, we do have short-term thinking. But you're going to have short-term thinking as long as you've got a stock market. And that's just the way it is. That's not going to go away. Or even if you're a private company, you can't walk back to your shareholders and say, I bought this thing called Zapier, and we spent $10 million putting all our systems together, and we got zaps and cool stuff like that. But I don't know what MCP is now. And so all that money we spent, we actually have to go spend it again. John, you work for a mid-sized company. How would you feel going back into your board and saying, that money I spent last year? Oops, I learned something. And I'm going to go on one more tirade. Microsoft replaced their head of HR this week. A little known story. I couldn't even do it as a story on #trending because I couldn't figure out a frame for it. But basically what they said, if you read through all of this stuff carefully, is that idea of work fast and break things, we don't want to do that anymore. And that idea, the commercials used to have well, you've learned a lot from your failures and that makes you a better employee. That's crap. That's gone.
And that's a mistake.
If it ever,
And that's a mistake. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that one of the great visionaries in these companies at the moment is Mark Zuckerberg. Marky Mark is going to turn out to be the guy who was right all along because he's the one that pushed open source AI. You might joke about virtual reality and Meta's augmented virtual reality division, but it is the future. He's the guy that's going to be able to point back to this at some point. Sure, they're going to be billions of dollars lost, and they can afford it, okay? Apple had a car division. Did you know that? They blew like $10 billion developing a car company and just shut it down. All of these bets that Zuckerberg is taking are the real deal. I honestly believe that. I believe in the open source AI development arena. The fact that so many of the open source models, including DeepSeek, are based on Llama should tell you something. And as far as the augmented reality stuff, I don't know if you've ever seen the Meta Ray-Ban glasses, but those things are on fire. The idea that you can wear a regular pair of sunglasses or glasses and you've got a heads up, like the heads up display isn't going to exist until about June, July of this year. But the fact that you can get feedback, turn right at this next corner, that sort of thing, take a picture, record a video, tell me, I'm trying to remember this thing. Can you please tell me that without having to whip out your phone and do that? It's a form factor that makes sense, that is absolutely 100% natural. You guys both wear glasses. I fake it by wearing contact lenses. But it is a model that works, and it's a model that is going to pan out in the future, regardless of how much money you think is being wasted on it at the moment.
Go, John.
No, I was just going to say that I think ultimately there's going to be, we talk about some very high-end AI-related things, of even right down to being able to book vacations and that type of thing automated through websites and so on. But I think you're also going to find that there's going to be the less used AI companies where they decide that the only thing we need to do with AI is what I call an electronic companion that help me to write reports, go through and
I thought you were talking about electronic girlfriend or boyfriend here.
We did that one last week.
Yeah. But something that says, I've got 7,000 unread emails in my inbox, help me to keep that clean. Those types of things are a much lower scale use of AI, but are still extremely helpful. I think you're going to see that there's going to be different adoptions of AI, and none of them are bad. It's just they work differently for different companies. And you may find, like I can tell you right now, for our company, we're starting out with that lower level use of AI to figure out what is going to work for our organization, because we're not going to spend millions of dollars on it. So we're going to figure out what works and what doesn't and gradually work our way up the scale.
Which is the exact right thing to do. Marcel, I'm never sure how to describe any of these guys as brilliant in these large organizations, because who knows who had the idea or what reason they're doing them for. Zuckerberg could have released an open source AI just to get at OpenAI, We know that OpenAI was created so that Google wouldn't control AI. I'm not going to give them great motives even on these things. But the reality is they have the money to be in it for the long term, to basically run it like a venture capital thing. 8 of these things failed, doesn't matter. One of them is going to succeed. I'm going to make multi-billions. And eventually they will drive technology forward. The average company can't do that.
Oh, I agree, yeah.
So they have to figure out what they're going to do, and you have to explain it. But now we're at a crossroads. What John has described is what I call the Excel model of AI. It's like we got Excel and can do individual things, mostly disconnected. You can use it in a lot of places, and it's going to be very effective. You'll have some connections with things, and we did Excel was the same thing, and we'll make tremendous security mistakes on those, for sure, when people start connecting these tools and playing with them. And then we've now got a level of sophistication that is going to come up, and the hype will be there that it's going to do everything automatically. It may eventually. In the interim, there's a lot of things happening under the surface. So I guess what I'm saying is, don't buy the thing that Manus is great, if it's as you describe, or MCP is great, but we got a lot of work to do on these. And the hard part begins now. You'll have a super intelligent brain and a body that's still being built.
Yeah, it's funny that you should mention the body, because I think we should do a whole on robots. They are the ultimate agent. They are the embodied agents that can go around in our world and do things in the way that a human being is able to do things. And to me, that is an incredibly exciting field. I think we can do a whole show on robots. I could certainly talk for a whole show on robots. If you let me go back to MCP, the whole coding thing for a minute, there are different levels of what you need to do. First of all, John, to address your security concerns for these coding tools, most of the 2 biggies that I'm talking about will use a local repository, okay? They're not working on the web. There are tools out there like Replit, for instance, where your code is being housed somewhere out on the internet. A different level of security that you need to worry about. But the serious tools like Windsurf and Cursor will work with your local repository, whether it's on your PC or your corporate network, a local code base that it works from. This is where the MCP stuff comes into play, because it is not just slapping crap together. There is an actual set of rules that it follows, including creating virtual local development environments and so forth. Those are tools for serious programmers. By the way, the term vibe coding was created by Andrej Karpathy, one of the founders of OpenAI, who was on the board at Tesla, or one of the chief scientists at Tesla. He's the one that came up with the term vibe coding. The idea is, the reason it's called vibe coding is you talk through what it is that you're going to do. And in fact, you can use tools like Whisper and so forth. Actually, in the Windows world and in the Linux world, it's not quite as well developed, although I have created agents that do that for me. But in the Apple world, for you two Apple
fanboys,
there is actually a Whisper type tool that is always listening in the background that will translate all your speech into text so that you can plug it into any field. I don't remember what it's called, but people love this thing. And I wish it was available for other operating systems as well. So that's as much as I'm going to give the Apple people today. But
beyond the fact that Windows 11 is the best reason to buy a Mac, right?
I'm not going to argue Windows 11 and Mac are the best reasons to run Linux as well. But the concept of vibe coding can be done a lot simpler as well. I have been spending time with both Windsurf and Cursor for the last couple of weeks. And I've been finding that those tools are not as easy as we like to make it out to be. You have no idea what's going on because you're always looking at code. You're always looking at your local repository. You're always looking at this sort of stuff. If you actually want to put out something relatively quickly that makes some kind of sense, it's a lot easier to open up a session in Claude. Just open up a project in Claude, put in a couple of files that you're working with, and then develop it entirely inside of Claude. I have had amazing success building tools for some of my customers doing this. I've got somebody where we're doing this big data conversion thing at the moment, and just talking it through with the AI has yielded amazing results. I've got Python scripts with graphical interfaces that you load up the data that you want, you manipulate it in the way that you want, and it filters it all out and it's a beautiful thing. I tried recreating the same project, but using a different type of input data, using Cursor, and the learning curve is intense. It's for real programmers as opposed to people like me. I don't want to knock those things to say it's for people who don't know what they're doing or for coders who don't know how to code. Once you get up at that high level, you can use them that way. But I think those are more for serious programmers, the sort of people that John would hire.
Hopefully.
Where you actually care about where the information comes from or where your guardrails are in terms of your development process, those are the way to do things. Yes, there's agentic stuff built into it, but only so far as you want to use those things. Like neither of those things has MCP built into it. The hooks are there, but you need to connect to it externally. And just for the record, flat out Claude, like just plain old Claude, if you use the desktop application, which by the way I do use as well, you can tie it into MCP and use all those external hooks just without needing one of these big fancy tools. Just to wrap that back around to Manus, I know we're dancing around this to some degree, but I question to some degree how world-changing some of these things are where the pieces already exist everywhere else. One of the hardest things to do today is to start an AI company that is novel and new, because everything tends to be built on top of something else that's already out there, which means no matter what you're doing, you're going to be playing with one of the big players, which is what Manus is demonstrating by virtue of the fact that they're playing with Anthropic.
I'm really looking forward to the day when the dust settles a little bit. What I mean is that every time you turn around, there's another company coming out with a new tool or something like that. You've talked about MCP and things that are starting to come out as far as developing, I'll call them standards for integration. And to get to a point where there are those integration standards where you can now start to take some of these tools. Marcel, you talk about probably 5 or 6 tools that you use on a regular basis. And that if you had the ability to take that and integrate those into an enterprise resource planning system or a Salesforce type system that easily gives you the ability to tie, if you've got 4 or 5 different tools you want to use, being able to use any one of those with your main business system, that's where we're going to see huge leaps and bounds forward in the adoption and the utilization of this stuff.
God knows I'm going to make a prediction, and you can blame me for this in 6 weeks instead of 6 years, because that's how fast things move.
Exactly.
But making predictions in the AI world is really dangerous because people still remember the prediction you made in their days. I've been stuck in the middle of projects where we bought a 4GL that could do a whole pile of screens really quickly, get everything going. And then you got to that last 10% and it just wasn't going to work. Fell apart on processing, couldn't cope, all that sort of stuff. And while you'd be in the middle of working on one of these projects, somebody else would walk into your office and say, there's a new one. We should get on to this one. And this one's going to be the one. But we did this in periods of 6 months and a year. Now this has been absolutely compressed. Even with these tools, we finally got to a point where they were ready for prime time and built for construction. People were able to put things together, and now we have some of the tools that we would have thought were fanciful are now just they're part of the legacy code.
That's a good word, legacy code, because that's part of the challenge. Integrating all of these modern systems that we want to work autonomously. 2025, the year of the agent. We want these things to work autonomously, but they need to be able to work with legacy systems.
Yes, that's exactly what I was talking about.
So even just, again, it sounds like I'm beating up on Manus here, but part of the promise of something like this, and part of the promises of Operator, is that it doesn't matter that you're dealing with legacy systems. Your artificial intelligence, whatever it happens to be. I even hesitate to call these things large language models anymore, because every one of these things does multiple things. So calling them LLMs is almost ridiculous now, but let's just call them AI models. Part of what they are able to do, or what they're trying to do, is to understand all of the stuff that's already out there without having to build very specific hooks to have these things talk to each other.
We've now evolved to a place where you have exactly what we had before. Enterprise systems, the new enterprise systems are going to be systems like Salesforce. SAP may be one that emerges and stays in focus too. But definitely Salesforce is the new enterprise app. They'll have everything built into you. They will give you the AI, they will give you the functions, they will give you everything you need in one package for one low monthly cost. Well, actually, it's not a low monthly cost, but that's another story. But now we have tools that can allow us to integrate with other applications, and some of those applications will build an MCP layer so that people can actually work with them. And other proprietary applications will equally be able to build an MCP layer. The hard part begins. And you said it, Marcel, is now we have to deal with the complexity. We're going to have to deal with security. We're going to have to deal with the building. Once you start touching these systems, I was watching just one example, somebody doing vibe coding and working with MCP, and the guy tosses off this little thing. Remember, this thing can call functions, so it can delete and change your data too. You've got to watch out for that. I'm going, oh.
I should have backed up my data before I started this.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So we have serious tools that people will have to look at in a serious fashion. But I think the framework is falling into place now, finally, because I'm talking too much, but I went through this thing where I did a story this week, and I called the old Wendy's commercial, "Where's the beef?" And that's what everybody's been talking about in AI. They missed the Excel moment, which is really, like I said, if you take most of what's out there with AI now and think about Excel, a tool set that you can put in the organization, risks and stuff, but it can do a whole hell of a lot. You can do a lot of stuff with it. Now we get into big
You can also
system
break a
integration.
lot of things with Excel.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. And I might be back here in 2 years going, AI in this format, just say no, like I did with Excel. Because like people can go too far. But it's democratized and it's out of control.
Yep.
And you need to figure out how you're going to work with that. The next level, though, comes into the serious system architecture. And we're going to have to actually take a look at it and say, how much do we want? Do we want to buy something that that does everything for you? Do you want to build something, or do you want to get another application out there and integrate that? And we're back to architecture again. How do we get here?
Buy or build.
Well, I think that large monolithic companies that control these things from the top, they're a problem masquerading as the answer and vice versa. Because even you were talking about SAP or Salesforce rather, and the fact of the matter is they're on another giant monolithic company in order to build and maintain their AI system. Maybe they'll do something internally, but I seriously doubt that. They're going to hand that off to somebody else, and everybody hands off one piece or another of whatever it is that they're doing to another company. And not everything is a life and death system. And in fact, I would argue that most things aren't life and death systems. So for most things, the promise of being able to automate the vast majority of what you need or want is going to be easily filled by some of these systems and some of these technologies that are being built. The humanoid robot, again, I want to do a whole show on robots, but the humanoid robot solves a very simple problem. How do I create a machine that can manipulate all of the things that I already have out there? Why build a robot lawnmower? Okay, why build a robot Roomba when you can have a humanoid robot that has your vacuum cleaner and can move around the house with your existing vacuum cleaner, or can go outside and push your lawnmower on your lawn, as opposed to having a specialized piece of whatever. Sometimes the easiest thing to do is to try to create that thing, whatever it happens to be, that can do most things reasonably well most of the time, which is one of the popular definitions of AGI. I linked you, by the way, in the chat there. Maybe you can throw it in the show notes. Alan's conservative countdown to AGI. How close we are to artificial general intelligence. And I know that nobody agrees on what that term is, but I think that most people would agree that AGI is an artificially intelligent system that is good, that is better at doing most tasks than most humans. And we're awfully close to that point. We're getting really close to what this type of AGI is. We're not talking artificial superintelligence where it's so far beyond us that we have no hope of even remotely understanding what this thing that we've created is. but something that is able to do most of what humans require most of the time better than the vast majority of all humans out there. That we're getting very close to. And agents that are flexible enough to be able to understand the world in which they're navigating, I don't think you want to ignore just how amazingly world-changing that is going to be. And like I said, despite the fact that I sounded like I was beating up on some of these companies that are working on this stuff, this is world-changing.
Yes, for sure.
But I think the place we got to, and this is interesting, if somebody's listening to this and you're confused, that's okay, because it is,
that's my fault.
That's where we are. We're in confusion
are.
land right now. But the interesting thing that happens is we're no longer treating these AI models as having to be able to do everything. They are going to be guides or agents that can guide us through system algorithms that may very well be very reliable. And the thing I got as I put this together, just to give you a simple example of where we might be, if you go to OpenAI right now, it can search the web. So you can say, give me the stock prices for this company. It may come back to you and hallucinate. It may come back to you with something that it got confused with in terms of what the stock price is. It may read the right one. It'll come back to you absolutely confidently. But if I use MCP and say, call Yahoo's algorithm and give me the stock price for this today, I'm going to get an exact answer. And that, to me, was one of the interesting things that came out of this, was we might be able to start constructing the parts of our systems that have to be algorithmic and counted on and tested, and be able to make those coexist with a smart agent that knows, I'll go get this data from here, this data from here, this data from here, and come back to you with some ideas. I'm thinking of that as heavily cool. But we're in the land of architecture again. You're going to have to actually design your systems and come up with an approach. And I think this is more comfortable for some people, especially right now, is to be able to start thinking in those terms. Because now I can see a practical application. I can start to see some ways that I'm going to map out. And that would be my thought for somebody if you were doing this now. When we started this program 100 years ago in AI terms, which is I think maybe 12 weeks ago or 15 weeks ago, we were talking to people about go out and learn stuff. Try this out, test it out, and do that. And that's still good advice for what I call the Excel model. If you're going to just use it as a standalone, do all kinds of things that you can get personal productivity from it. You can do some basic things in it. And don't forget, the work world is full of basic things. I still believe, and I still go back to it and say, I run a publication company, a tech company, and I do what used to take 5 or 6 staff members in an afternoon using AI now. So there's a lot of opportunity. I don't want to dismiss the opportunity that's there for people just using tools right now to enhance their productivity like mad. But we're now also in the big league of systems to say, and now in my mind is the time for people to start building some pilots, testing, trying this stuff out, do what Marcel's doing, just try and work some things out. And this is where small companies hate investing. This is, if you're Mark Zuckerberg, you got the money. We have to find that 10% model. And I used to say this to my staff, even a small company, you got to steal 10% of your time from me. And not so you can go off and play golf, but so you can actually do some things and learn. And I made it a game of stealing the time from me because it was fun. But reality, we should have 10% of our time allocated to testing things out, learning new things, and trying these things. Because what you want to see, John, I think, is give me a model of this so I can actually kick the tires on it now. We can start building security in instead of bringing me back this thing and have me look at it and go, it can write to the database.
The model can evaluate your security as well.
Exactly.
Don't forget that the tool that you're trying to secure can also help you find out where things aren't secure.
Those are the things you need to start doing and playing with. Well, the consequences are...
Arthur C. Clarke famously said that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And my corollary for all the years, since that time, was if it's not, if it's distinguishable from magic, it's not sufficiently advanced technology, the way that I like to look at it. And I have been waiting for that magic moment. I'm a science fiction technology guy. As you may have noticed, I'm a little obsessed with this stuff right now, which is why I play with everything that comes along, which is why I never have time to do serious work, but whatever the hell that means. But we are living in a time of magic, okay? And if you think of it that way, it's a lot less scary. It's what would you do if I actually gave you an honest-to-God magic wand where you just say a couple of magic words and like miraculous and wondrous things happen? If you think of it in terms of, oh my God, there's all these words that I'm going to have to learn. I'm going to have to sit inside the class at Hogwarts and learn how to say Wingardium Leviosa or whatever to be able to... You don't have to do any of this stuff because you can just talk like a normal human being, as opposed to learning some kind of weird Latinish collection of words. This thing understands what you want, or if it doesn't understand out of the bat, you can just talk to it and say, maybe do these things, maybe do these other things. But it is a world of magic. And if you develop a playful attitude toward this, you're going to be a lot less likely to suffer whiplash.
But again, it
I was
depends
looking for the
on
word, whiplash.
Go back to your Arthur C. Clarke
Yeah.
metaphor there, or analogy? Metaphor? No, never mind. Anyway, the thing you said about Arthur C. Clarke.
Yes.
As my wife always goes, you're an English major, right? Yeah. Okay. So but the technology is impressive as magic to who? If you go out to a foreign culture that's never seen fire before, or never seen they still rubbing sticks together. If you found somebody like that, basically, and you brought a lighter and you went and showed them the flame, they would go, magic. They would go, magic. You would know that's an engineering feat and probably have a good understanding of how it's done. And that's the world we're going to be in. They're going to be the people who are now working feverishly behind the scenes to basically work to make sure we have the structures in place so that we can have systems that are magic. That's a cool challenge.
It is, but also remember that a lot of the things that we now take for granted, like a smartphone, for instance, right? A lot of these things are like to try to imagine redeveloping this technology from scratch to get to where we are today. There's nobody in the world. You cannot find a human being in this world that understands how these things are actually entirely built. There's like a gazillion different technologies that go into this thing that everybody carries around in their pockets. And to have this weird idea that you need to understand every aspect of it, that you need to be aware of every aspect of it, belies just how much knowledge across how many different fields has to come together to make these possible. So you do have to accept that some of these things are, and I'll use that word again, are magic, because otherwise you're never going to get past the, oh my God, I need to understand everything about this thing before I can actually start using it. And I don't think that's true. I think if you just, this is cool and how can I use this cool thing, you're on your way.
But we have various levels, and we're used to that.
I was just going to say that I think listening to the conversation and kind of working through, and that we're in I'll go back to our initial conversations from weeks ago, that we're in a lot of cases in the play stage, that we're playing with it and seeing what we can do with these tools. My big fear is that we're going to take these tools, put them into production, and as we talked earlier, without adequately considering security and the impacts. We have all kinds of issues right now from a cybersecurity standpoint and cyber threats and everything. And the concern I have is people are going to be putting in these AI tools, going, somebody wrote these things, so they must be good, and not considering the security part of it. And I was actually thinking about you last night, Marcel, believe it or not, that with the hallucinations. I was sitting there and I asked ChatGPT if the Maple Leafs were playing. And they said, yes,
Yes.
there is a 7 o'clock game And being that it's a 7 o'clock game in New York, and being that you're in Toronto and it's 5:10, the game has already started. I'm like, what? The game doesn't start for 2 hours. So
You should have asked for the score and bet on it.
you're right, I should have. But that's a very simple thing. But that there's still work to be done. There are still guardrails that businesses need to put in place before just leaping in and assuming that everything that comes out of AI is correct. And I know that
I agree. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I know we've talked about the same thing with Excel and so forth, and I agree completely. I'm not saying that this is specific to AI, but I've talked to an awful lot of people that assume that because it came out of AI, it's 100% accurate. Kind of like the same thing, well, I saw it on the internet, so it must be.
So I'm going to butcher another quote just for a minute here, which is play is a child's work. Okay, that's what a child's job is, to play. And you play is the means by which you learn to understand the world. And I know this was like the theme of the very first Project Synapse that we did. But just because you've got toys to play with doesn't mean that there isn't somebody out there who's vetted those toys, who's tried to make sure that they're not dangerous, that they're not coated in lead paint and shit like this. So we have systems in place for those things. So I'm not belittling anything that you worry about on a day-to-day basis, John, because I think it's important that there are people like you out there that do think about these things. But I think we have to stop thinking that it's all on us, okay? And we have to have some level of trust for what's out there. Like the stupid thing that you talked about, the game time, it's hilarious. It's funny, and it brings into play some wonderful time travel concepts. But you're right in the sense that it's bad information that was delivered with some amount of, obviously, that's the way it is. But these tools are built on human knowledge, and humans make stupid mistakes all the time.
Absolutely.
Like we do constantly, always, all the time. And I can't tell you how frustrating it is if I even search on Google these days. You search for the phone number of a company and it lists you like 7 other companies before the one whose phone number it is that you're trying to find. That's just freaking annoying. And even in the old world of information, if you're being buried with false information or something other than what you're looking for up front, I don't know that it's any better than an AI language model that hallucinates its answer. By the way, what do you think of this one? Multimodal AI model, MAME.
Oh, geez, a new acronym. Okay, a new acronym was born. I think
it's a scary one as well. MAME. I was making a joke. Sorry.
Yes.
No, that's yep.
These models are going to maim us.
Yeah. Okay. I think that took the air out of our sails. No, I think the issue, though, coming through this is that this week has been a tremendous week for confusion.
At some point, I know you're trying to get me to wrap up here, but at some point, I'd also like to talk about that paper that I sent you about the intelligence explosion. And I really think that we are nearing that world magic. I think we're nearing a point where we can't possibly keep up with it. And the only way to be able to survive in that world, and I don't mean survive as in continue breathing day to day, but survive without going mad, is to start treating it that way, like magic. So
I'm
anyway,
up
the
for
intelligence
that.
the intelligence explosion and robots. Why don't we do that next time?
We can't do both of them in one show, but
okay, robots then. I want to do robots.
Well, let's do robots and the intelligence explosion. Send me the link to that paper again so I can post it in our notes so that people can, the audience can read it if they're interested. And we'll try and post some stuff. In the meantime, I will post the link to this on right underneath me right here in YouTube. It'll be in the show notes. So you can actually read the paper that Marcel's talking about before the show if you want. But you can also talk to us on Discord. And there's a link, again, if you're watching this on YouTube, right down there, there's a link. And right underneath my head, there's a link.
Yeah, and you can
Actually
call
get
Jim
onto
a
our Discord
communist
channel.
or something.
You can certainly do that. So come on to the Discord channel. You can talk to us about this, and you can help us set this up for the discussion about robots, for the discussion about the explosion, the intelligence explosion. Is that
Yeah, all right. Yeah, intelligence explosion. Yeah.
cool?
It's fascinating stuff. The idea is that, and again, just as a teaser, the idea is that the pace of development is accelerating in such a way that we are likely to see in the next 2 years, 20 years worth of development. So things will move ahead so quickly, so fast in so many ways that imagine compressing the last century into 10 years. And this is what we're looking at for the next 10 years, another century in 10 years. Fascinating stuff and a fascinating paper.
In AI time.
No, in human time.
No, AI time. You meant like it runs fast.
Oh,
Yeah.
You're making a joke. John's making
Yes,
a joke.
he's making a joke.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Guys, it's time.
Live
It's
long
time.
and prosper.
Live
Peace
long
and
and
long
prosper.
life.
And that was our show for this week. Just a reminder that if you're watching this on YouTube, the links to our Discord channel and some of the things we were talking about will be on YouTube right underneath the video. If you're listening to this on an audio podcast, I'll put the links to some of the things we talked about and our Discord channel on the show notes, which you can find at technewsday.com or technewsday.ca. Just select the menu item that says podcasts. That's it. Have a great weekend, and I'll be back with the tech news on Monday morning.